this is James, or Darthcephalus, on the Saber forums. So there's been a lot of talk online lately about the idea of basics, and as they relate to spinning specifically. So I wanted to take a little bit of time here today and go over some of the basics of spinning. They're a little bit different from the basics of some of the martial arts training. The trick is that with spinning we're not dealing with anything that's going to contain strikes, that has to have follow-through. It's all about momentum and blade manipulation around the body. So starting at the very beginning, before we deal with the saber, let's talk a little bit about footing. Footing for spinning is fairly straightforward. Unlike martial arts, where footing is a lot more complicated, footing for spinning is basically just standing for the most part. Later down the road, when you get better with the spinning and the manipulation of the blade, then you can start to move with it and put in some more complicated footwork. But to begin with, there's two things that you need to see about the footwork. We've got one stance, which is like this, kind of a T stance. You can see that one of my feet is pointed in the direction of the blade hand, the other is pointed forward. We can have this close together like I have here. You can have it further apart. You can bend your knees with it. Counterintuitively, with spinning closer together is going to be easier for us because we stand less of a chance of hitting ourselves in the leg with the saber. So we've got this one, the T stance, and if we're using the T stance, the blade is mostly on this side of the body, and you see that we're going in front and behind. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Okay, the other stance is both feet forward. Okay, if I'm doing double wield or dual wield with one in each hand, the T stance becomes a little bit difficult because you see if I'm working on this side, it's fine. When I try to go over and work on this side, I have to reach a little bit, or I have to switch my stance. So if we're doing a lot of switches back and forth, or if we're using both hands, the 2-foot forward stance might be a better option for us. We'll be using this, like I said, in dual wield. Okay, now a little bit about the saber. In terms of basics, we can start off, well, we're going to be starting off with some of the spins. Things that you need to know before the spin. Basically, if you can grip the saber, you're good to go. For the most part, sabers are going to have a specific weight. They're heavier down at the base, very light up at the top. So a lot of the spins work the same with lightsabers that they do with canes, walking sticks, or, for instance, a hunting saber, where a lot of the weight is in the handle. Wouldn't recommend starting off with a hunting saber. That sounds like a good way to get an injury to me. But the weight is down here, so if you can hold it, you're familiar with it, you're pretty well good to go. In terms of blade length, you want something you're going to be able to swing without having to hit the ground. This blade is actually a little bit tall for me, so you can see that I can spin it, but I have to keep my hand up a little bit. If I go low like this, I'm going to hit the ground. But I can adjust, but if you want to be the most comfortable with it, get something that you can reasonably easily swing around without hitting the ground. Alright, so that's what you need to know about the saber and about the footwork. When we start, let me just very briefly about body position before we start spinning. Some of the moves that you're going to be doing with the saber, I showed you before, are going to have the blade going behind the back and in front of the body, like this. Okay, off to one side. Okay, alternately, some of the other moves that we'll see, and some of the ones you might see in other videos, are going to have the blade going to the right and to the left of the body. You notice that this is the same movement, just a different body orientation. Is this, if I pull it to the side, is this. And most of what I'm going to be showing you is going to be dealing with the front and behind, rather than the left and right. Alright, so getting into the downward wield, which I wanted to finish covering in this video, we'll deal with the upward wield in a later one. The downward wield is pretty straightforward. We're going to be in a directional stance here, with my foot pointing that way, my other one straight ahead. And the frontward downward figure 8, rather, is composed of two parts. One of them, this spin. And you'll notice when I'm doing the spin in front of my body, my grip is pretty tight. I'm manipulating the blade with my wrist and with my forearm. Okay, this would be the same if I was doing to the right or the left of the body. In order to get it over here to the left, I've got to have a more rigid grip, and I'm controlling it with my forearm. Okay, so the front spin, tight grip, controlled with forearm. The back spin, loose grip, controlled with the wrist and a little bit of the elbow. And so back spin, front spin. You put those two things together, and you have the basic downward figure eight. Now you could do a downward figure eight without that tight grip in the front. You could sort of loosen it up and do this. That's going to get you in trouble with later moves. So keeping that tight grip on the one, loose grip on the other. So with each beat, you're gripping the saber. So when you start off with these, it may be easier to start off with big motions, just to get used to it. Okay, when we get to the Obiani, big motions, going to be the easiest way to do that. So you start with the big motions, and then when you get better with it, you pull it out towards the wrist and the forearm, and you make the motions that your arm makes smaller. That makes the saber motions quicker. Alright, so this is the downward figure eight. We add one more beat to this, and you get the Obiani spin. This is tricky for a lot of people, and there's a lot of videos on this, so let me give you my take. The Obiani spin, we're doing one circle in front, we're doing a circle in back, and then we're doing the type of circle that we'd be doing in front, with the rigid hands, controlling it with the forearm, but we're doing it in back. Okay, and then we're bringing it back up front. Okay, the motion in large form, which I find makes it easier to start with, is backwards, and notice what we've done here is we've replaced that front beat with the front beat from behind the body. And you also notice another thing with this. One place that people get into trouble is trying to do the Obiani spin, and I go behind my back. If my hand actually gets behind my back, there's no way that I can pull it forward. I get stuck. So you keep your hand to the side of your body. That turnaround behind the back looks like this. If you can do this, then you can pull it out to the front. We're also keeping the blade moving so that it makes the spin behind the back. So, spin behind the back, like that. Alright, another thing to keep in mind when you're tightening this up is to look at what the pommel is doing, or look at what the hand, or the whole hilt of the blade is doing. Okay, here, I've got my pommel down here, and it's at my hip, and I'm making a rotation with the pommel. When I start tightening that up, the big motion again looks like this. The smaller motion, where I can get some of the speed. I don't have to throw my arm nearly as far forward. I'm keeping it at my side, not behind my back, and I can pick up some speed. Loose spin, tight spin, loose spin, tight spin. So the Obiani is actually 3 beats. We're getting 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And that third beat is on the upswing, as opposed to the 2-beat figure 8. Alright, so practice the Obiani, practice the figure 8. These moves are the basics for the downward wield, and they're going to transition into just about everything else we do. When we start, we're going to be able to start adding beats to the Obiani. We're going to be able to start doing crossovers into the full plum flower, adding beats to the Obiani. We'll get to those later. Let's start with the basics. Figure 8, Obiani. Alright, and I'll see you for the next video where we'll discuss the upward wield. What that looks like. The upward wield Obiani is a more elusive creature than the downward wield, but we'll talk about that next video. It could technically be considered an intermediate step rather than a beginning, but I'll at least discuss it when we get into upward wield. Until then, I'll see you on the forums.